Picture a massive solitary world that actively fights the sweeping current of the heavens. A sphere caught in a slow, irreversible spiral toward its own spectacular destruction. It travels backward through the freezing dark, fiercely defying the synchronized, orderly waltz of its sibling planets and native moons. This rogue celestial body is locked in an eternal, invisible physical conflict, a heavy cosmic drag that has defined its doomed existence since the moment of its violent capture. Imagine standing on a surface so brutally cold that the very air freezes solid and completely collapses onto the ground as shimmering pale snow. Surprisingly, the universe refuses to let this crushing, absolute cold silence the violent fires of planetary activity, allowing towering geysers of liquid nitrogen and dark dust to erupt into the pitch-black sky. It is a place of impossible, breathtaking paradoxes, where volcanism thrives not in lakes of searing molten rock, but in the shivering depths of the outer void. If we were to look closer at the grand history of human curiosity, we would find that this gargantuan textured mystery was entirely hidden from our ancestors for untold eons. It existed purely as a mathematical abstraction, a silent ghost waiting patiently for the evolving lenses of terrestrial telescopes and the robotic eyes of passing spacecraft to finally unveil its deeply scarred face. The revelation began as nothing more than a faint, defiant glimmer in a damp English observatory, a tiny secret kept perfectly in the massive shadow of a newly discovered gas giant. Deep within the sanctuary of this quiet, darkened room, you do not need to brace yourself against the freezing winds or the crushing gravity of the Neptunian system. You're safe. These wonders are yours to inherit as you sleep, delivered across billions of miles of empty space directly into the warmth of your quiet mind. Your eyes are softly closed, but your imagination is about to open to a breathtaking, slow-motion journey that begins at the very edge of the known dark. The celestial curtain is steadily lifting on a story of a silent, frozen wanderer finally stepping into the awareness of humanity. Emerging from the abyssal dark of the outer solar system, a tiny, defiant spark caught the eye of a brewer-turned-astronomer in 1846. William Lassell, peering through a custom-built specular metal reflector telescope, noticed this faint glimmer just 17 days after the monumental discovery of Neptune itself. The timing was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to human curiosity piercing through billions of miles of absolute void. Before this moment, the deep blue giant hung alone in the mathematical predictions of astronomers, a ghost finally pinned down by observation. Yet, almost immediately it was proven not to be solitary, accompanied by a companion that would rewrite our understanding of celestial mechanics. This initial speck of light, captured in a brass tube under the damp English sky, was our very first greeting from a world completely locked in deep freeze. Gazing across the unfathomable chasm of interplanetary space, Lassell could never have comprehended the bizarre, dynamic landscape he had just unveiled. It was merely a pinprick against the crushing blackness, a silent watcher keeping pace with a newly found god of the sea. Deep within the outer fringes of our cosmic neighbourhood, light itself becomes a precious, fading commodity. Travelling billions of miles from the fiery heart of our solar system, the sun's rays are stretched incredibly thin by the time they reach this distant orbit. Here, the world receives merely 1/900th of the radiant energy that washes over the familiar landscapes of Earth. Bathing in this twilight existence, the moon experiences a perpetual freezing dusk that would feel entirely alien to human senses. The warmth we associate with daylight is entirely absent, replaced by a biting, unimaginable cold that alters the very physics of matter. Shadows stretch long and weak, cast by a star that has lost its commanding dominance over the sky. Surprisingly, the universe adapts to this starvation of light, creating environments where exotic chemistry thrives in the near absolute zero. It is a shadowed frontier standing on the edge of interstellar space, a realm where the concept of day is barely distinguishable from night. Even in this profound dimness, the landscape retains a stark, desolate beauty, illuminated by the faintest whispers of solar radiation crossing the immense void. Suspended in the gravitational grip of an ice giant, this pale sphere commands attention despite its remote location. Ranking as the 7th largest moon in our entire solar system, its physical dimensions place it in a unique class of substantial planetary bodies. It rivals and even surpasses the dwarf planets of the Kuiper Belt, a massive globe of rock and frozen volatiles wandering the dark. If we were to look closer, past its modest ranking in sheer volume, we would uncover an outsized complexity that baffles planetary scientists. The secrets locked beneath its frosty crust tell a story of cosmic violence, capture, and ongoing geological metamorphosis. It is not merely a dead, static rock, but a living, breathing engine of cryovolcanism, disguised by its unassuming silhouette. Greatness in the cosmos is rarely measured by diameter alone, and this distant world proves to be a heavy hitter in terms of scientific value. Its mere existence challenges our models of planetary formation, holding keys to unlocking the chaotic history of the early solar system. Hovering just above the horizon, an enormous azure globe dominates the sky, bathing its companion in an eerie, unearthly luminescence. Neptune acts as a colossal mirror, catching the faint sunlight and bouncing it back into the void, directly onto the frozen plains of its largest moon. This reflected shine casts a perpetual ghostly blue glow over the jagged Aegean nitrogen frosts. During the long stretches of night, when the distant sun is hidden, the landscape is never entirely submerged in pitch black. Instead, it is washed in this ethereal sapphire twilight, painting the ridges and cryovolcanic ash in shades of deep marine. The planet above is so vast and close that it provides significantly more illumination than a full moon does on Earth. Wandering across this terrain, an observer would see their own shadow rendered in soft blue-tinted edges, shifting as the great planet rotates. It is a mesmerizing, silent light show, a gentle reminder of the immense gravitational tether binding these two disparate worlds together. For over a century following its sudden discovery, this world stubbornly refused to surrender any of its physical secrets to human eyes. Early astronomers, armed with the best optics of their time, could only perceive it as a moving, dimensionless dot of light against the deep cosmic dark. It was a mathematical abstraction as much as a physical place, defined entirely by its orbital parameters rather than its geography. Generations of stargazers spent their lives tracking this singular speck, meticulously charting its bizarre, backward journey around the blue giant. Through the eyepieces of massive terrestrial observatories, no mountains, valleys, or clouds could be resolved, leaving the imagination to fill the void. The immense distance rendered even the most powerful telescopes practically blind to its true nature. This frustrating anonymity persisted through the birth of modern astrophysics, a tantalizing mystery hovering at the very edge of the map. It was a blank slate waiting for the right explorer, a silent witness to the evolution of human technology and our relentless drive to see further. Hurtling outward on a grand tour of the outer planets, a small robotic emissary finally shattered the long century of ignorance. In the late summer of 1989, the Voyager 2 spacecraft swooped past the Neptunian system, bringing its cameras to bear on the enigmatic dot. In a matter of hours, a featureless point of light was miraculously transformed into a rich, staggeringly complex world of active geology. Data streamed back across billions of miles, slowly rendering an alien landscape on the glowing monitors of mission control. Scientists sat in stunned silence as images of peculiar cantaloupe terrains, vast frozen lakes, and dark streaks of active eruptions materialized before them. The spacecraft revealed a surface that had been completely repaved by internal heat, defying expectations of a dead, ancient, cratered ice ball. This brief, frantic flyby lifted the veil, completely rewriting textbook definitions of what a distant moon could be. The robotic encounter remains humanity's only close-up glimpse, a fleeting moment of clarity that provided enough data to fuel decades of continuous scientific revelation. Despite existing in a region of space starved of intense solar radiation, this celestial body maintains a surprisingly brilliant presence in the dark. It shines relatively brightly for such a distant moon, catching the eye of observers far more easily than its dark, carbon-rich neighbours. This dazzling visibility is the direct result of a highly reflective, perpetually renewing crust of frozen volatile gases. This high reflectivity creates a feedback loop, reflecting heat away, and maintaining the bone-chilling temperatures required to keep the gases frozen solid. It is a glittering jewel suspended in the absolute cold, its bright face an indicator of the furious, freezing meteorological cycles happening below. Stretching majestically across the void, the sheer scale of this icy sphere commands absolute authority over its local orbital neighbourhood. Measuring over 2,700 kilometres across, its colossal bulk dwarfs every other piece of rock and ice trapped by Neptune's gravity. It is a genuine leviathan of the outer dark, large enough to forcefully assert its gravitational dominance on everything around it. The immense diameter of this world gives it a substantial surface area, roughly equivalent to the size of Russia and Australia combined. Across this vast expanse, varied terrains and distinct geological provinces unfold, offering enough geographical diversity to constitute a full-fledged planetary body. Its sheer size allowed it to retain internal heat, preventing it from freezing solid instantly, and powering the complex geological engines within. Among the scattered rubble and tiny potato-shaped moonlets that make up the rest of the Neptunian system, it stands as an undisputed giant. Its massive presence is a constant sweeping force, acting as a relentless shepherd to the rings and smaller satellites caught in its wake. Looking at the architectural layout of this planetary system, a stunning and violent imbalance immediately becomes apparent. More than 99.5% of all the mass in orbit around Neptune is hoarded by this single, massive sphere. The host planet's other 13 recognised moons, along with its entire ring system, amount to no more than a trivial scattering of cosmic dust in comparison. Such extreme mass concentration is entirely abnormal, whispering dark clues about a chaotic, destructive past that wiped out an original family of satellites. When this heavy intruder was violently captured by the blue giant, its immense gravitational bulk likely shattered or ejected the native moons. It swallowed the orbital space entirely, leaving only shattered remnants and captured debris to nervously share the distant reaches of the system. This greedy consolidation of matter makes it a lonely monarch, ruling over a heavily depleted kingdom of ice fragments. The sheer density and weight of the moon profoundly affect the tidal dynamics of the gas giant itself, a heavy pendulum forever swinging in the dark. Standing on the brittle, nitrogen-frosted plains, an observer would search the heavens for the familiar warming beacon of our solar system. Looking out from the surface, however, the sun appears merely as an exceptionally bright star suspended in the eternal black sky. It lacks the fiery, disc-like presence we know, stripped of its ability to bathe the landscape in warm, golden light. This distant star provides no comforting heat, offering only a harsh, pinpoint glare that casts long, razor-sharp shadows across the cantaloupe terrain. At this profound distance, the sun is just another point of light in the galactic tapestry, albeit one that is painfully piercing to the naked eye. The immense gulf of 30 astronomical units reduces the mighty engine of our solar system to a brilliant yet impotent speck. Gazing up at that tiny brilliant dot drives home the staggering isolation of this remote, frozen world. It is the final realization of standing on the edge of the abyss, where the familiar sun is nothing more than a memory fading into the deep cosmic ocean. Drifting in that deep cosmic ocean, one might expect the currents of this distant system to follow a predictable, orderly flow. The vast majority of planetary bodies participate in a synchronized counterclockwise ballet, a fundamental rhythm established during the very birth of the Sun. When the primordial clouds of gas and dust collapsed, they imparted a uniform, sweeping spin to almost everything that coalesced from the stellar debris. Yet, among all the major satellites inhabiting our stellar neighbourhood, this icy world dances entirely to its own defiant, contrary beat. It alone traces a purely retrograde path, actively moving against the dominant rushing rotation of the magnificent blue giant it endlessly orbits. Looking at the majestic, synchronized clockwork of the heavens, this backward trajectory is a glaring, magnificent anomaly that immediately commands deep scientific attention. Observing this backward march forces a complete, sweeping re-evaluation of how moons and planets are fundamentally supposed to form together. Standard astrophysical models dictate that a host planet and its natural satellites condense slowly from the same swirling disk of localized primordial material. Because they share this singular local origin, they naturally inherit the exact same directional momentum, spinning and orbiting in harmonious, unbroken unison. Travelling in sheer defiance of these fundamental rules, the icy sphere proves that the heavens are not always born in orderly, predictable ways. Its retrograde motion acts as a giant, undeniable red flag to any observer attempting to accurately chart the ancient history of the Neptunian system. The mechanics of its reversed orbit simply cannot be explained by a gentle, localized accumulation of space dust and freezing gas over eons. Instead, this reverse path speaks quietly of disruption, immense chaos, and a profound break from the standard planetary family tree. It is a massive intruder that completely refused to adopt the native rotational culture of its new, overwhelmingly powerful gravitational home. The sheer momentum required to maintain this contrary direction is a lasting testament to the immense, raw forces constantly at play in the outer dark. As your breathing falls into a slow, steady rhythm, let your mind wander to the origins of this kidnapped, frozen wanderer. A backward trajectory strongly suggests that this massive body was never born in the gentle, nurturing embrace of its host planet's original nebula. It is a heavy cosmic immigrant, originating much further out in the dim, chaotic frontiers of the solar system before being forcibly relocated. Eons ago, it likely roamed entirely free as an independent entity, a silent dwarf planet navigating the frozen wastes on its own lonely trajectory. Only a catastrophic close-quarters encounter with the blue giant's immense gravitational well could have successfully ensnared such a massively dense object. The planet's pull acted as an inescapable, invisible net, violently decelerating the heavy wanderer and dragging it into a permanent, albeit reversed, orbital prison. This grand capture scenario beautifully explains the profound orbital mismatch between the massive host and its largest, most complex companion. It is an adopted child of the planetary system, bringing an entirely foreign geological and chemical history into the gas giant's immediate orbit. The resulting union was not a peaceful merging of celestial bodies, but a violent gravitational subjugation that permanently altered the destiny of both worlds. Curiously, despite its highly chaotic and violent origins, the orbital path it now traces is a masterpiece of smooth geometric perfection. Captured astronomical objects typically exhibit wild, highly eccentric orbits, swinging dangerously close to their host before flinging far out into deep, freezing space. Yet, this particular trajectory has miraculously smoothed out over the countless ages, settling into an almost flawless, perfectly round orbital circle. This extreme lack of eccentricity is highly unusual and suspicious for a heavy body that was snatched violently from deep interstellar space. It suggests that millions of years of intense gravitational friction were absolutely required to tame the wild elliptical path of the initial chaotic capture. The moon was repeatedly stretched and violently pulled, its chaotic orbital energy bleeding away as internal heat until it found a stable, circular equilibrium. Now, the vast physical distance between the captured moon and the gas giant remains remarkably constant throughout its entire backward journey. The serene, unbroken perfection of this circular path masks the turbulent, fiery history required to carve such a precise ring in the void. It is a quiet, highly orderly outcome born directly from an incredibly chaotic, cataclysmic cosmic collision in the ancient past. Because of this highly unusual backward trajectory, the physical stresses continuously exerted on the moon are almost unimaginably intense and relentless. The immense gravitational pull of the host planet is constantly fighting against the satellite's contrary momentum, creating a brutal, unending celestial tug-of-war. These invisible tidal forces do not merely affect the frozen surface, but reach deep down into the very core of the icy globe. Every square inch of the rigid crust is subjected to immense, cyclical squeezing and stretching as it pushes hard against the planetary grain. Unlike a native moon travelling in easy harmony with its planet's rotation, this retrograde wanderer experiences a much harsher, more abrasive gravitational environment. The profound friction generated by this eternal conflict produces immense internal heat, actively preventing the deep interior from completely freezing solid. This powerful, unseen energy source turns a seemingly dead, heavily frozen rock into a dynamically active, geologically fascinating world. The relentless tidal squeezing acts exactly like a massive invisible planetary heartbeat, constantly pumping essential warmth into the dark subterranean depths. It is a spectacular, ongoing demonstration of how raw gravity alone can vividly power a world, substituting for the absent warmth of the distant sun. The precise locking mechanism is a final, undeniable act of submission to the planet's overwhelming, inescapable gravitational authority. While the heavy moon manages to stubbornly maintain its defiant backward orbit, it has completely lost the physical freedom to rotate on its own terms. It circles the giant sphere exactly like a dancer holding a rigid, unblinking pose, never once turning its back on its massive planetary partner. Moving perpetually against the rapid planetary spin comes at a profound, highly destructive, and completely invisible cost to the moon's long-term survival. This backward celestial waltz generates a specific type of intense tidal friction that acts as a heavy cosmic drag on the satellite's momentum. Instead of being pushed slightly outward into safety, this icy wanderer is gradually, relentlessly having its vital orbital energy sapped away. The host planet's rapid rotation creates a massive gravitational bulge that constantly lags just behind the moon, pulling backward on it with relentless persistence. Over millions of years, this invisible, heavy tether is quietly robbing the moon of its forward speed, inch by inch, millimetre by freezing millimetre. It is a slow, agonizingly quiet drain of kinetic vitality, fundamentally altering the physical geometry of the system over vast geological timescales. Despite the immense, staggering scale of the orbital path, a complete journey around the colossal gas giant happens with surprising, almost alarming speed. It takes just under 6 standard Earth days for the massive moon to complete one full, sweeping revolution in its backward trajectory. This highly rapid transit means the alien sky directly above its surface is a dizzying realm of constantly shifting perspectives and fast celestial motion. To a hypothetical observer standing quietly on the tidally locked hemisphere, the giant planet remains firmly fixed in the centre of the sky. Meanwhile, the background tapestry of distant stars streaks past the horizon at an astonishing, highly noticeable rate. The moon is practically racing headlong through the outer dark, covering hundreds of thousands of empty miles in a matter of mere hours. This brisk, relentless pace stands in incredibly stark contrast to the sluggish, decades-long orbit the entire planetary system takes around the distant sun. The continuous speed of the 6-day waltz beautifully amplifies the sheer, raw kinetic energy permanently trapped within this complex gravitational relationship. Time in this remote location is measured not in long months or years, but entirely in the rapid, cyclical pulse of this hurried backward dance. Let any remaining physical tension smoothly drift away, simply imagining the smooth, sweeping, tilted curves of celestial mechanics floating in the silent void. Compounding the absolute strangeness of its backward motion, the Moon's circular orbital plane is also tilted at a highly unusual, extremely severe angle. It emphatically does not circle the gas giant neatly around its thick equator, as most well-behaved native satellites naturally do. Instead, its rapid path is pitched sharply upward and downward, slicing dramatically through the host planet's equatorial plane in a sweeping slanted incline. This severe, crooked tilt is yet another glaring piece of physical evidence directly pointing to its violent capture, rather than a peaceful, native formation. A true native moon would have peacefully settled into a flat, level disk aligned with the planet's own spin, but this wanderer stubbornly refuses to conform. Because the massive host planet itself is tilted heavily relative to the Sun, and the Moon's orbit is tilted even further, the geometry is extraordinarily complex. The Moon practically weaves wildly around the planet, exposing completely different, freezing latitudes to the distant solar glare as it quickly travels. It is a bizarre, three-dimensional orbital puzzle that actively creates some of the most extreme, highly volatile environmental conditions in the outer solar system. This highly peculiar, heavily angled misalignment naturally leads to drastic and incredibly prolonged shifts in how the faint, distant sunlight interacts with the frozen surface. The complex combination of the planetary tilt and the orbital incline forces the Moon's poles to alternately point almost directly at the faraway Sun. Consequently, the precious distribution of vital solar energy is radically skewed, physically creating brutally long, intensely exaggerated seasonal variations. These highly dramatic shifts in available sunlight are the primary, unstoppable engine driving the complex, migrating weather patterns across the entire frosty crust. The severely tilting orbit absolutely ensures that the delicate frozen gases resting on the surface are never truly at peace, forever migrating in response to the light. Ultimately, the backward waltz, with its severe, sweeping angle, powerfully dictates the entire rhythm of life and chemistry on this desolate, surprisingly beautiful world. Stepping onto this desolate, surprisingly beautiful world, the first overwhelming sensation would not be the alien sights, but the sharp, biting chill of absolute cold, freezing breath instantly. The sheer lack of thermal energy here defies human comprehension, plunging to an astonishing negative 235 degrees on the Celsius scale. At these profound, agonizing depths of the thermometer, the very physics of standard matter begin to fundamentally break down and change. Ambient heat is practically non-existent, leaving a landscape that is locked in a state of perpetual, unforgiving thermal starvation. Such extreme, unrelenting cold means that even the most volatile substances lose their kinetic freedom, locking their molecules into rigid, immovable crystalline grids. It is an environment so brutally frigid that a stray drop of liquid water would shatter like fragile glass before it even touched the frozen ground. Enduring this environment requires a complete shift in how we understand planetary geology, as the traditional elements of rock and magma are rendered entirely obsolete. The deep penetrating chill acts as the ultimate sculptor of this outer domain, dictating the bizarre materials available for constructing the vast sweeping terrain. Every towering ridge and sweeping plain is a direct, undeniable manifestation of this endless deep space freeze. Because of this inescapable, absolute zero approaching environment, atmospheric elements that freely float as invisible gases on our home planet undergo a radical, stunning transformation. Nitrogen, The primary life-giving component of the air we naturally breathe completely condenses and freezes solid upon contact with the devastatingly cold ground. It rapidly crystallizes, blanketing the entire sphere in a thick, shimmering global crust of highly reflective, pale ice. This vast, uninterrupted shell of frozen gas coats the underlying topography like a thick layer of freshly fallen, heavily compacted winter snow. Under the faint, distant starlight, the vast plains of solid nitrogen glimmer with an ethereal, almost metallic sheen, stretching endlessly toward the curved horizon. It is a surreal, alien landscape where you could literally walk across the solidified sky of another world. The sheer volume of this condensed gas forms a surprisingly robust planetary skin, capable of supporting towering topographical features and bearing the weight of migrating glaciers. Despite its delicate chemical composition, the intense, unyielding thermal deficit grants this nitrogen frost the physical durability of terrestrial sandstone. It stands as a brilliant, blindingly bright testament to the transformative, almost magical power of extreme cosmic temperatures. Allow your shoulders to completely drop, letting your resting body feel heavy and grounded, much like the incredibly dense, immovable foundations of this distant moon. Beneath the shimmering, volatile layer of frozen atmospheric gases lies a deeply buried, incredibly rigid skeleton composed entirely of pure water ice. In this profoundly cold regime, familiar frozen water sheds all its fragile, melting qualities and instead behaves exactly like solid, impenetrable bedrock. This intensely hardened layer acts as the primary crustal granite, forming the immense, structural backbone of the entire planetary sphere. It is so brutally cold that this underlying layer of water ice could easily shatter standard steel tools upon impact, behaving essentially like the hardest, most unyielding metamorphic rock. The towering cliffs, deep chasms and sweeping valleys are not carved from silicate minerals, but from this incredibly dense, permanently petrified water. Without this incredibly tough, unyielding foundation, the softer, more volatile frosts above would lack the necessary structural support to form complex, sweeping geographical features. The water ice bedrock provides the massive, silent stage upon which the more active, migrating seasonal frosts perform their eternal, shifting dance. It is the hidden, dark heart of the crust, a permanently locked vault holding more frozen ocean than countless inner worlds combined. Scattered like delicate exotic jewels across these sweeping solid plains are patches of even more volatile, highly reactive chemical frosts. Along with the dominant nitrogen shell, distinct localized deposits of frozen methane and carbon monoxide are intricately woven into the bright shimmering tapestry of the crust. These strange alien snows collect in shallow depressions and along the leeward sides of ancient ridges, creating subtle chemical variations in the terrain. Unlike the permanent rock-solid water bedrock, these highly sensitive frosts are constantly sublimating and recondensing in direct response to the incredibly slight shifts in ambient starlight. They form a highly active, heavily migrating veneer that continuously alters the chemical makeup of the ground beneath a hypothetical explorer's boots. The interplay of these varying exotic ices creates a highly complex, heterogeneous surface geology that utterly defies the notion of a simple, uniform snowball. Detecting these incredibly specific, localized chemical fingerprints requires sophisticated, spacefaring spectroscopic instruments capable of reading the faint reflected light. Through these advanced lenses, the apparently monotonous white plains suddenly resolve into a wildly diverse, chemically rich mosaic of segregated, freezing gases. It is a silent, ongoing chemical sorting process, driven entirely by the severe, unforgiving thermodynamics of the outer solar system. Surveying this vast, heavily frosted expanse, geologists are consistently struck by a profound, highly unexpected lack of ancient historical wear and tear. The overall visual age of the icy crust is remarkably, undeniably young, presenting a freshly paved appearance that completely contradicts the true, ancient age of the Moon itself. Instead of displaying a chaotic, heavily bombarded history dating back to the dawn of the solar system, the ground looks practically newborn. This startling, unblemished freshness strongly hints at a highly dynamic, incredibly restless world that absolutely refuses to preserve the physical memories of its past. Some massive, unseen internal mechanism is continuously working to actively repave the sweeping plains, erasing the old scarred crust with vast floods of fresh, freezing slush. The surface acts like an endless, self-cleaning cosmic whiteboard, constantly being wiped clean by the Moon's own internal driving heat. Finding such a pristine, heavily renewed landscape so incredibly far from the warming influence of the Sun was a massive, highly disruptive shock to planetary science. It forces the realization that distance from the solar center does not guarantee a dead, geologically silent and perfectly preserved planetary fossil. This world is actively, vigorously destroying its own geological record, preferring to constantly present a fresh, newly frozen face to the deep, silent void. Normally, a planetary body exposed to the chaotic, heavy bombardment of deep space for billions of years should be heavily pockmarked, resembling the rugged, battered face of our own Moon. The sheer lack of these deep, violent scars decisively proves that highly active, ongoing geological processes are quickly and efficiently wiping away the ancient evidence of celestial collisions. Whenever a stray asteroid does manage to punch a hole in the crust, the wound is swiftly, inevitably filled in by welling slushy ice from below. This rapid, relentless healing process smooths over the violent, chaotic impacts, returning the landscape to its pristine, shimmering state in a mere blink of geological time. The few craters that do stubbornly remain are often heavily modified, their sharp rims softened and their deep bowls filled by settling atmospheric snows. It is a world that actively, constantly heals its own cosmic injuries, refusing to bear the permanent, violent scars of its turbulent surrounding environment. During the unimaginably long, brutally cold southern winter, this massive cap steadily thickens, actively drawing delicate, freezing gases directly out of the thin, collapsing atmosphere above. It acts as a gigantic, planetary-scale cold trap, aggressively hoarding the volatile elements and locking them tightly against the rigid water-ice bedrock. The sheer, crushing weight of this accumulating seasonal frost is enough to physically depress the underlying crust, minutely altering the local topography. When viewed from a distance, this sprawling, brilliant southern cap is the most prominent, visually arresting feature on the entire icy globe. Its bright, highly reflective nature effectively bounces a vast majority of the incoming faint solar energy back into the crushing blackness of space, perpetually reinforcing its own deep freeze. It is a massive, self-sustaining thermal fortress, dominating the climate and commanding the complex seasonal migration of the atmospheric gases. Surprisingly, this sprawling, endless sea of frozen gases is not merely a stark, monochromatic expanse of brilliant, blinding white. If you were to look closer, a subtle, highly delicate palette of unexpected colours begins to softly emerge from the supposedly barren, icy plains. Vast stretches of frost actually take on a highly distinct, gently glowing pinkish or softly reddish tint, completely defying expectations of a purely white, snowy landscape. This beautiful, blushing discoloration is not a trick of the faint light, but the direct physical result of harsh, high-energy cosmic radiation violently bombarding the exposed surface. As highly charged, invisible particles rain down from deep space and the host planet's magnetic field, they violently strike the delicate, frozen methane molecules resting on the ground. This constant, invisible bombardment systematically breaks apart the carbon bonds, forcibly rearranging the chemical structure of the ice over thousands of years. The resulting newly formed molecules possess completely different optical properties, actively absorbing the blue wavelengths of light and softly reflecting the warmer, redder tones back to the observer. It paints the desolate, freezing landscape with a warm, highly deceptive blush, an incredibly beautiful but completely sterile chemical sunburn. This faint rosy glow serves as a stark, visible reminder of the highly radioactive, deeply hostile environment this frozen sphere eternally navigates. Feel the solid, reassuring weight of your body resting completely still, a stark contrast to the highly complex, invisible chemical reactions silently unfolding in the dark. The persistent, slow-motion interaction between the faint, distant sunlight and these highly volatile surface ices actively drives a fascinating, surprisingly complex organic chemistry. Through a slow, agonizingly cold process of irradiation, the simple methane and nitrogen frosts are gradually, relentlessly baked into heavy, complex organic compounds. These newly forged, heavy, reddish-brown materials are known as tholins, a sticky, tar-like substance that slowly accumulates on the highest ridges and deepest plains. Tholins are considered the absolute fundamental building blocks of complex biological chemistry, heavily rich in the essential carbon required for organic life. Finding vast, sweeping fields of these organic precursors scattered across such a profoundly dead, freezing world is a breathtaking, highly significant astrobiological paradox. While the extreme, biting cold absolutely prevents these complex molecules from ever assembling into living, breathing organisms, their abundant presence is deeply tantalizing. They sit perfectly preserved in the planetary deep freeze, acting as a massive, untouched chemical repository, detailing the early, chaotic stages of prebiotic evolution. The soft, pinkish hues of the landscape are essentially the highly visible, undeniable signature of life's basic ingredients, hopelessly trapped in a permanently dormant, deeply frozen state. Slicing violently through this colourful, organic dusted frost are massive, highly dramatic geographical scars that betray the immense, physical stress gripping the moon. Vast, towering ridges of solid, upthrust ice heavily crosshatch the landscape, forming complex, intersecting networks of deep, plunging valleys and high, sharp peaks. These immense linear features can stretch continuously for thousands of miles, resembling the heavily cracked, battered shell of an enormous cosmic egg. Geologists strongly suspect these spectacular sweeping formations are the direct result of intense, internal tectonic stresses, violently fracturing the rigid outer frozen crust. As the hidden, subsurface layers expand and contract due to the agonizing, rhythmic tidal squeezing of the backward orbit, the rigid water ice bedrock above simply cannot bend. Instead, it violently snaps and buckles, thrusting massive, jagged plates of hardened ice high into the thin, invisible atmosphere. These towering tectonic mountain ranges expose the incredibly deep, older layers of the water ice skeleton, briefly interrupting the smooth, sweeping plains of the pinkish nitrogen snow. They stand as magnificent, silent monuments to the immense, raw, physical forces constantly warring beneath the deceptively calm, heavily frozen exterior. Following these massive, sweeping fracture lines reveals the true, highly chaotic nature of a world that is constantly, violently tearing itself apart from the inside out. The chaotic nature of this world reaches its structural zenith in the Western Hemisphere, where the surface seems to buckle and ripple in a way found nowhere else in the known heavens. Dominating this vast, frozen region is a geological enigma that planetary scientists have come to describe as the Cantaloupe Terrain, a name that perfectly captures its bizarre organic appearance. It stretches across thousands of kilometers of the moon's frigid crust, a staggering expanse of topographic oddity that defines the very character of this distant satellite's visible face. If one were to hover over this territory, the scale of the rippling ice would feel like gazing down at a vast, petrified ocean frozen in the midst of a violent, heavy storm. It is a territory of immense complexity, where the standard rules of a lunar cratering are replaced by a rhythmic, undulating architecture that speaks of deep, internal unrest. This region serves as the primary visual identity of the Moon's older, more established crust, holding the secrets of an era when the interior was even more restless. The sheer vastness of this textured world suggests a global process that once gripped the entire Moon, leaving behind a permanent frozen signature of its internal power. It stands as a monumental record of the Moon's transition from a captured chaotic body into a world with a distinct self-generated geography. This terrain is not just a surface feature, but the skin of a world that has been turned inside out by the heat of its own survival. If we were to look closer at the undulating landscape, the visual similarity to biological terrestrial life becomes almost unsettling in its precision. The surface is characterized by a dense, intricate network of interconnected depressions and raised ridges that look uncannily like the thick textured skin of a giant, ripe melon. These complex repeating patterns create a rhythmic, tactile topography that defies the usual flat, barren expectations of an icy moon in the deep dark. Every curve and indentation follows a systematic, almost cellular logic, weaving a tapestry of ice that feels more like the work of a cosmic gardener than a random geological accident. The play of faint, distant starlight across these ridges creates deep, shifting shadows that emphasize the rough, dimpled texture of the terrain. Walking across this land would feel like navigating the surface of an enormous cosmic fruit, where the ground rises and falls in predictable rounded swells. It is a landscape of soft edges and deep hollows, a striking departure from the jagged, crystalline peaks found elsewhere on the lunar surface. This organic-looking texture is so pervasive that it completely obscures the underlying bedrock, creating a unified, repeating theme across the western plains. The consistency of the pattern across such a vast area suggests that the forces shaping it were uniform and powerful, acting on a global scale. Surprisingly, the universe has not repeated this specific, highly organized architectural experiment anywhere else in our vast, diverse stellar neighborhood. No other planet, asteroid or moon across the entire solar system features this specific dimpled topography on such a grand and consistent scale. It stands as a singular curiosity, a unique geological fingerprint that makes this distant satellite one of the most visually distinct and identifiable bodies in the cosmic dark. While other icy worlds possess their own fractures and ridges, none exhibit the bizarre cellular regularity found here. This uniqueness suggests a very specific set of thermal and material conditions that are only found in the heart of the Neptunian system. It is as if the Moon were a laboratory for a single, unique geological process that flourished briefly and then was frozen forever in place. This isolation of form makes the terrain a holy grail for planetary researchers, representing a rare opportunity to study a mechanism that exists nowhere else. The singular nature of this landscape serves as a reminder that even in a galaxy of billions of worlds, some wonders are truly one of a kind. It remains one of the most compelling reasons to return to the edge of the solar system, to touch a texture that has no equal in the void. Deep within the hidden, crustal layers of the Moon, a slow-motion subterranean struggle for physical balance gave birth to this strange, dimpled skin. Scientists believe the landscape was primarily formed through the fascinating process of diaporism, where massive lumps of less dense ice began to rise through the heavier, colder layers above. This upward migration of subterranean material acted like a bubbling lava lamp, pushing and warping the surface into the textured patterns we see today. As these lighter plumes of warm ice fought their way toward the exterior, they displaced the existing surface, creating the characteristic ridges and hollows. The entire Western Hemisphere was essentially turned inside out, with the interior's restless lighter materials forcing their way to the top of the geological stack. This process requires a delicate balance of heat and material density, indicating that the Moon was once warm enough for its ice to flow like a thick, viscous fluid. The cantaloupe terrain is the frozen evidence of this grand internal uprising, a moment in time when the moon's very foundations rose to meet the cold of space. It reveals a world that is not a solid, static block of ice, but a layered living system of competing materials. Each ridge is a frozen witness to the internal heat that refused to let the moon remain a simple frozen sphere. As you feel the weight of your body resting completely at ease against the surface beneath you, consider the titanic scale of these individual textured features. Each individual depression, known to geologists by the Latin term cavus, can measure up to a staggering 30 kilometers in width. These are not mere pebbles or small incidental divots, but enormous valley-sized basins that create a landscape of monumental repeating swells. An explorer standing at the bottom of one of these hollows would be surrounded by rising icy slopes that block out the horizon in every direction. The sheer regularity of these 30-kilometer basins is a testament to the power of the internal plumes that pushed them into existence. They represent a massive reorganization of the moon's surface, where billions of tons of ice were shifted to accommodate the rising interior material. This repeating scale creates a sense of immense, rhythmic order that is both beautiful and intimidating to the human imagination. These basins act as natural amphitheaters, trapping the faint blue light of the host planet and reflecting it back in a soft, diffused glow. They are the primary building blocks of the melon skin, defined by a scale that dwarfs the largest human cities. This structure is characterized by striking appearances, yet these strange pits are fundamentally different from the violent, explosive scars of impact craters. They completely lack the characteristic central peaks and high, raised rims that usually accompany the hypervelocity strikes of asteroids or comets. Instead of being excavated from above by a falling cosmic projectile, they were formed from within by the moon's own internal restless energies. They are more akin to the depressions found on a rising loaf of bread, where internal forces create dips and swells in the outer crust. This lack of impact features is a major clue that the terrain is geologically young and was formed through active indigenous processes rather than external bombardment. It shows that the moon's surface is a dynamic canvas, capable of self-generating complex structures without the need for outside influence. The hollows of the cantaloupe terrain are peaceful collapses rather than violent wounds, representing a more subtle and sophisticated form of planetary evolution. They speak of a world that is shaped more by its own internal heat than by the chaotic traffic of the surrounding solar system. This internal architecture suggests that the moon possesses a resilience that allows it to maintain its unique identity against the constant rain of cosmic debris. Between the chaotic, dimpled textures of the melon skin lie expansive, eerily smooth plains of hardened, pristine water ice. These level stretches provide a sharp, visual contrast to the bubbling complexity of the surrounding cantaloupe terrain, appearing like frozen lakes in a sea of textured ridges. They represent moments of relative geological calm, where fluid like ice or slushy mixtures may have once flowed to fill in the lower reaches of the landscape. These plains are so remarkably flat and unblemished that they seem almost artificial, standing as silent witnesses to the moon's ancient liquid past. It is likely that these regions were formed by cryovolcanic flows that pooled in the depressions between the rising ice plumes, smoothing over the rough edges of the melon skin. They act as a unifying element, bridging the gap between the various ridges and depressions and creating a more cohesive global structure. Walking from the rough, dimpled ridges onto one of these smooth plains would feel like stepping off a rocky mountain onto a perfectly paved highway of glass. They provide a vital record of the fluid processes that once dominated the moon's surface, adding a layer of liquid history to the solid, frozen landscape. These frozen pools are the calm intervals in the moon's long, turbulent story of internal growth. Notice the gentle rhythm of your own breath as you contemplate the massive fracture lines that cross-cut this melon-like skin. This complex structure is further complicated by a series of ancient tectonic faults that slash violently across the Western Hemisphere, indicating periods of severe global crustal stress. These massive fracture lines can stretch for hundreds of kilometers, physically bisecting the ridges and depressions of the cantaloupe terrain with surgical precision. They tell a story of a crust that was not only bubbling from within, but was also being pulled and crushed by the immense gravitational forces of the nearby gas giant. These faults are the scars of a planet-wide tug-of-war, where the rigid ice was forced to snap and buckle under the weight of its own orbital journey. The ridges of the melon skin are often offset by these cracks, showing that the tectonic activity occurred long after the initial textured patterns had solidified. This layering of geological events reveals a world with a long and complex biography, where one process is constantly being overlaid by another. The combination of bubbling plumes and sharp fracture lines creates a landscape of unparalleled geological richness, reflecting a history of both internal growth and external pressure. It is a world that has been stretched to its limits, yet remains remarkably intact. The material composition of this bizarre textured terrain consists almost entirely of ancient, dirty water ice that has been hardened by the absolute cold. In this freezing, distant regime, the familiar ice of Earth loses all its slippery, fragile qualities and behaves structurally like the densest continental granite. It is a rigid, formidable mineral that can support the weight of massive 30-kilometre-wide swells without collapsing under its own gravity. This dirty ice is likely mixed with dark, silicate dust and organic compounds, giving the melon skin its characteristic greyish and reddish hues. Its structural integrity is what allows the Moon to maintain such a complex and varied topography so far from the Sun. If the crust were made of anything less substantial, the weight of the ridges and the depth of the depressions would eventually level themselves out over time. Instead, the frozen water acts as a permanent petrified foundation, locking the bubbling shapes of the diapirs into a state of eternal, cold stasis. This granite-like ice is the true architect of the Western Hemisphere, providing the strength required to build a world of such monumental textured complexity. It is the solid stage upon which the more transient frosts of the atmosphere play their seasonal games. The presence of tectonic faults and subtle variations in the frost layers indicates that the melon skin has survived through multiple geological eras. It is a transitional landscape bridging the gap between the Moon's chaotic birth and its relatively stable, frozen present. Despite being older than the polar caps, it still retains a remarkably fresh appearance compared to the ancient cratered highlands of other planetary bodies. This relative youth suggests that the Moon's internal heat engine remained active for a much longer period than anyone originally anticipated. The cantaloupe terrain is thus a window into the Moon's maturity, a testament to a world that stayed warm and restless long after its neighbours had gone cold and silent. It is the enduring heart of a Moon that has mastered the art of self-renewal. Surprisingly, the universe refuses to let the crushing cold of the outer void silence the fires of planetary activity, allowing the enduring heart of this Moon to express its maturity through a spectacular process of self-renewal. Even in these most remote reaches, where the sun is little more than a piercing glint, the fundamental drive of volcanism persists with an eerie, quiet intensity. It is a profound realization that heat is not merely the domain of sun-baked worlds, but a hidden passenger that travels to the edge of the interstellar dark. While we often associate volcanic might with the searing basalt of Earth, the architecture of fire adapts to its environment, erupting even through a crust of solid nitrogen ice. This persistent geological pulse challenges the notion of dead worlds, proving that internal energy can survive the most hostile thermal environments imaginable. The universe offers a strange, chilling symmetry here, where the mechanics of eruption are preserved while the materials are utterly transformed. It is a testament to the enduring power of internal heat, a legacy of capture that keeps the heart of this world beating. This distant volcanism is a silent witness to the laws of thermodynamics, which dictate that wherever energy is trapped, it will eventually seek a path to the surface. Standing on this frost-covered Moon, one witnesses the grand universal spectacle of a planetary body breathing, even in the absolute zero of the Neptunian system. This structure of active, ongoing geological life is an exceedingly rare jewel in the crown of our solar system's many satellites. Triton stands as one of the very few celestial bodies definitively proven to host active, observable eruptions in the modern era, joining an elite group that includes our own Earth and the hyperactive moon Io. Most other worlds have long since surrendered their internal heat to the vacuum, becoming cold, silent fossils of a more violent ancient time. To find such vigorous activity so far from the Sun is a staggering anomaly that defies early astronomical expectations of the outer planets as being purely frozen and inert. The Moon's ability to sustain these eruptions suggests a reservoir of energy that is as persistent as it is mysterious, a geological engine that continues to churn. This active status elevates the Moon from a mere satellite to a primary world of interest, a dynamic laboratory where we can watch the processes of planetary evolution unfold in real time. Each time a vent ruptures, it confirms that the Moon is a member of an exclusive club of worlds where the surface and interior are in constant conversation. This rarity makes every observation a precious piece of data, a rare glimpse into the mechanics of a world that refused to go quiet. It is a spectacular, lonely achievement for a body that was once a wandering stranger from the deep Kuiper Belt. Deep within this shivering crust, the ingredients for eruption are not the glowing, molten silicates of a terrestrial volcano, but a far more exotic and frigid brew. These cryovolcanoes spout a freezing mixture of liquid nitrogen, methane, and fine, dark dust, creating a spectacle of cold fire that operates at temperatures far below the freezing point of water. Instead of glowing lava flows, the surface experiences the sudden, pressurized release of volatile liquids that have been trapped and heated just enough to turn into a driving, eruptive force. If we were to look closer at the point of eruption, we would not see a mountain of cinder, but a vent in the ice where high-pressure gas screams into the thin atmosphere. The liquid nitrogen, having been warmed by the Moon's internal heat or the faint touch of the Sun, expands with explosive speed as it reaches the lower pressure of the surface. This creates a vertical fountain of mist and particles, a freezing jet that mimics the form of a terrestrial geyser, but uses the chemistry of the deep freeze. Surprisingly, the materials of the sky and the ground are interchangeable here, as the same gases that form the atmosphere power the Moon's volcanic heart. This icy volcanism is a total inversion of our earthly experience, where the heat is relative and the magma is composed of frigid, invisible vapours. It is a masterpiece of thermodynamic adaptation, using the only tools available in the dark to maintain a state of geological unrest. As you feel the weight of your body resting completely at ease, let your mind drift to the historic voyage of the late 20th century. Voyager 2, as it made its lonely trek past this blue-tinted world, captured stunning and surreal images of massive plumes shooting nearly 8 kilometers up into the thin air. These towering columns of nitrogen gas and dark particulate matter were caught in the act of rising, looking like slender, dark pillars against the vast pinkish plains below. The plumes do not explode in a cloud of smoke but rise as clean, directed jets, eventually reaching a point where they encounter the high-altitude winds. At this height, they spread out like an anvil or a long dark ribbon, demonstrating the surprising reach of the Moon's internal pressure. These images were the first definitive proof that the outer solar system was not the graveyard of dead rocks that many had previously assumed. Each of these 8-kilometer fountains is a physical bridge between the Moon's hidden interior and the freezing void of space. To see such a vertical reach on a world so small and cold is a profound reminder of the energy stored within its captured frame. These towering shadows stretching across the frost remain some of the most iconic and haunting images ever returned from the deep frontier. Once these dark materials are lofted into the high sky, they become subject to the subtle yet persistent influence of the Moon's atmospheric currents. High-altitude winds, though thin and ghostly, are strong enough to catch the dark dust and carry it for hundreds of kilometers away from the original vent. This creates a global transportation system where the internal contents of the moon are scattered across its bright frozen surface by a wind that is barely a whisper. The plumes do not simply fall back down in a neat pile around the volcanic throat. Instead, they are bent and stretched by the lateral motion of the air. This atmospheric steering shows that even a nearly non-existent air supply can have a profound impact on the long-term appearance and chemistry of a planetary surface. It is a slow, methodical painting of the landscape, where the winds act as the brush and the volcanic ash acts as the dark organic ink. Looking at the vast patterns from above, one can see the clear directionality of the prevailing winds, which dictate exactly where the dark materials will eventually rest. This transport mechanism ensures that the volcanic activity is not just a localized event, but a global process that continuously alters the moon's albedo. The dark streaks are like long, elegant signatures written across the ice, documenting the persistent movement of a world that refuses to be still. Notice the gentle rise and fall of your chest, a quiet rhythm that contrasts with the violent, eruptive nature of the distant frost. These dark, elegant streaks eventually settle onto the bright pinkish frost of the southern hemisphere, leaving long and dramatic stains that permanently mark the pristine plains. Because the surface is so highly reflective and pale, these dark deposits stand out with startling clarity, looking like soot scattered across a field of fresh, rosy snow. The accumulation of this dark matter creates localized hotspots on the surface, as the dark dust absorbs more of the meager sunlight than the surrounding white nitrogen ice. This differential heating can trigger further sublimation, causing the ice beneath the dust to erode more quickly and creating strange, dark, flawed depressions. It is a cycle of feedback where the interior's darkness changes the very landscape it lands upon, accelerating the restless migration of the frozen gases. These dramatic streaks transform the moon from a simple, clean snowball into a complex, weathered mosaic of light and shadow. They are the fingerprints of the cryovolcanoes, undeniable evidence of a world that is constantly being stained and repainted by its own internal secretions. The southern plains are thus not just a static ice cap, but a historical archive of every breath the moon has taken in its modern era. Subsurface pockets of nitrogen ice act like geysers, building up pressure under the warming sun until they violently rupture. The mechanism behind these displays is not a chamber of magma, but a delicate interplay between the faint sun and the translucent upper layers of the nitrogen crust. This trapped energy gradually warms the nitrogen ice until it turns into a gas, building up immense pressure within a sealed, icy pocket in a solid-state greenhouse effect. This pressure continues to mount, straining against the rigid lid of the frozen surface until the weight of the ice can no longer contain the expansion. Eventually, the crust violently ruptures, and the pressurized nitrogen screams out through the crack, carrying a slurry of dark dust from the depths. This is a geyser driven not by the fires of a core, but by the patient, persistent gathering of sunlight over the course of the long, decades-long seasons. This process is a beautiful example of how even the weakest energy source can trigger a violent and majestic physical event when given enough time. It shows that the surface of the moon is not a solid, impenetrable wall, but a fragile skin that is constantly being punctured by the forces it traps. Each rupture is a sudden, gasping release of energy, a moment of explosive transition from solid to gas that defines the moon's surface dynamics. If we were to look closer at the timeline of these events, we would find that these eruptions are not brief, momentary bursts like the geysers of Earth. Instead, they can persist as continuous, year-long events that reshape the sky for months on end. A single vent once opened can act as a steady, high-pressure chimney, continuously venting gas and dust into the atmosphere for more than an Earth year. Throughout this long period, the plume remains a permanent fixture of the landscape, a dark, unwavering pillar that the winds continuously bend across the plains. This steady state of eruption creates an environment for the formation of the long dark streaks, as the constant supply of dust allows for thick deposits to accumulate. It is a slow-motion catastrophe, a volcanic event that unfolds with the patience of a world where seasons last for 40 Earth years. This enduring activity highlights the difference in scale between our fast-paced world and the slow, grinding clockwork of the outer planets. Standing in the shadow of such a plume, one would feel the passage of time differently, watching a single geological event that spans seasons without fading. It is a marathon of planetary release, a sustained exhalation from a world that has a great deal of internal pressure to share with the cold, silent void. Allow your mind to rest in this state of deep relaxation, recognizing the stillness in your own limbs as the distant moon continues its restless dance. The dark, mysterious dust that gives the plumes their striking visibility may be composed of organic materials dredged up from deep beneath the crust. These are likely the same tholins and heavy hydrocarbons formed by radiation, which have been buried by eons of falling nitrogen snow. When the geysers rupture, they act as a geological sampling tool, bringing these buried chemical secrets back up to the surface for us to witness. This organic soot is the soot of a freezing world, a rich mixture of carbon and nitrogen that could hold the fundamental blueprints for prebiotic chemistry. The fact that the moon is actively vomiting these materials onto its surface suggests that the interior is a rich, chemical brew. Each eruption is thus an invitation to study the deep, hidden layers of a world we can only see from the outside. The dark streaks are not just dirt, but the potential history of complex molecules in the outer solar system, preserved in the absolute cold. By raining these organics down onto the bright plains, the moon is effectively self-labeling its own history, providing a dark ink that tells the story of its deep, chemical maturity. These majestic geysers and their towering dark plumes provide the final, undeniable proof that even an utterly frozen world can be dynamically and violently alive. The image of a moon that is merely a dead, static ice ball is forever shattered by the sight of an 8-kilometre jet of nitrogen screaming into the black. It proves that activity is not a function of heat alone, but of the clever and persistent ways that matter responds to the energy it is given. Triton stands as a testament to the resilience of geological life, a world that has spent billions of years actively resisting the silence of the void. The violence of its eruptions is a beautiful contrast to the absolute stillness of the space around it, a declaration of existence that echoes across the billions of miles back to Earth. It is a world that breathes, shifts and stains itself, maintaining a restless, active identity in the face of the ultimate cold. This vibrant activity forces us to broaden our definition of a living world, recognizing that the pulse of a planet can be found in the freezing geysers of a distant moon. It is a magnificent synthesis of the moon's character, a captured wanderer that has built a life of fire and ice on the very edge of the sun's reach. The dark plumes are the flags of a world that refuse to be forgotten, waving forever in the thin nitrogen air. Waving forever in that thin nitrogen air is an invisible, tenuous envelope that clings to the moon with a desperate, fragile persistence. This atmospheric layer is composed almost entirely of nitrogen gas, the same substance that dominates the air in our own lungs, yet here it exists in a state of nearly impossible rarefaction. It is a ghostly veil that softens the harsh, jagged edges of the crystalline landscape just enough to define the boundary between the frozen world and the infinite blackness of space. Deep within this transparent shroud, the molecules are so far apart that they barely register as a physical presence against the skin. It serves as a microscopic cushion, a delicate buffer that mediates the interaction between the cold surface and the relentless bombardment of cosmic rays. This nitrogen breath is the moon's most subtle feature, an invisible architecture that manages to survive despite the weak gravitational pull of its frozen host. Surprisingly, the universe allows for the existence of an atmosphere so incredibly sparse that it is roughly 70,000 times less dense than the air we breathe on Earth. If we were to stand in the middle of a Triton storm, it would feel less like a gust of wind and more like a gentle rhythmic pulse of nearly nothing against a suit of armour. This invisible envelope is so thin that the stars above do not twinkle. They remain steady, piercing needles of light in a sky that never truly turns blue. This near-vacuum state means that the weight of the air above is almost undetectable, exerting a pressure that would be insufficient to support even a single drop of liquid. It is an atmosphere of ghosts, a realm where a single molecule of nitrogen might travel for miles before ever encountering another of its kind. Yet, despite this extreme vacuity, it remains a tangible part of the planetary system, a thin layer of gas that refuses to be completely stripped away by the solar winds. This structure of nearly non-existent air manages to support a surprisingly distinct and complex weather system that operates on a global scale. Despite the extreme thinness of the gas, thermal gradients across the frozen plains are enough to trigger the movement of atmospheric masses from one pole to the other. It is a slow, methodical redistribution of pressure that follows the decades-long rhythm of the shifting distant sunlight. Allow your shoulders to sink and your breath to steady, finding the same quiet stillness that precedes a change in this alien weather. These patterns are not driven by the violent energy of a sun-baked tropics, but by the subtle, freezing sublimation of the polar ices into vapour. The result is a planet-wide circulation that keeps the atmosphere in a state of constant, albeit extremely gentle motion. It is a weather of whispers, where the movement of the air is dictated by the thermal heartbeat of a world that is 99% frozen solid. Thin, wispy clouds of nitrogen ice form a few kilometres above the surface, hanging like delicate curtains of frost in the pitch-black sky. These ethereal formations are composed of microscopic crystals that have condensed directly out of the freezing air as temperatures drop even further in the higher altitudes. They are so transparent and fragile that they would likely be invisible from the surface, appearing only as a faint shimmering haze when they catch the glint of the distant sun. These clouds do not bring rain or snow in any way we would recognise, but instead act as a high-altitude repository for the moon's volatile nitrogen. They drift slowly across the cantaloupe terrain, casting no shadows but marking the invisible layers of the atmosphere where the cold is at its most absolute. This high-altitude frost is a reminder that the sky itself is capable of freezing in this remote corner of the solar system. If we were to look closer at the base of a plume, we would see the wind pushing against the rising column, sculpting the eruption into a shape that matches the local currents. It is a slow-motion struggle between the internal pressure of the moon and the external flow of its tenuous atmosphere. These winds are the primary architects of the moon's surface patterns, moving the dark materials of the interior across the bright canvas of the exterior with the patience of a master artist. The atmosphere extends hundreds of kilometres into space, forming a vast spherical halo of gas that slowly escapes into the surrounding void. Because the moon's gravity is relatively weak, it struggles to hold on to its nitrogen breath, allowing a constant stream of molecules to drift out into Neptune's massive magnetosphere. This creates a giant invisible torus of nitrogen ions that circles the gas giant, marking the orbital path of the moon with a trail of escaped gas. Notice the deep, heavy relaxation in your hands and feet, mimicking the slow, unhurried drift of these molecules as they leave the moon's embrace. This slow-motion atmospheric bleeding has been occurring for billions of years, yet the moon remains wrapped in its nitrogen shroud. It is a world that is constantly losing its air, yet it is just as constantly replenished by the active geysers and sublimating frosts of the surface. This eternal balance of loss and renewal is what allows the atmosphere to persist as a permanent feature of this distant, icy wanderer. Sunlight interacting with the upper atmospheric gases creates a faint shimmering haze that hangs over the world like a veil of smoke. This photochemistry occurs when the ultraviolet rays from the distant sun strike the nitrogen and methane molecules, breaking them apart and allowing them to recombine into more complex substances. These high-altitude particles act as a filter, softening the glare of the stars and the host planet for anyone standing on the frozen ground. This haze is likely the source of the reddish-brown tholins that eventually rain down to coat the ridges and plains of the cantaloupe terrain. It is a factory of organic complexity that operates in the near vacuum of the upper sky, transforming simple gases into the heavy building blocks of chemical evolution. This atmospheric smog is not a sign of pollution, but a signature of a world that is chemically active from its deepest core to its highest heights. This seasonal redistribution of mass causes the entire atmosphere to breathe in a rhythm that spans generations of human life. The weight of the air literally shifts from the north to the south and back again, driven by the slow, inevitable tilt of the moon's orbit. This global migration of gas is a demonstration of how a world's climate is inextricably linked to its position in the heavens. It is a pressure system measured in decades, a slow-motion atmospheric tide that governs the movement of every ice crystal on the surface. During the height of the long southern summer, frozen nitrogen sublimates directly into gas, thickening the local atmosphere with a surge of newly released vapour. This process happens without the ice ever melting into a liquid, as the extreme cold and low pressure force the solid crystals to jump straight into a gaseous state. This thickening of the air provides a temporary boost to the atmosphere's density, allowing for more vigorous winds and more complex cloud formations. As you let your mind wander further into this state of tranquility, imagine the surface of the moon beginning to gently steam with this invisible nitrogen fog. This summer breath is a quiet, powerful force that redistributes the moon's mass across its entire surface, moving the volatile frosts from the sunny pole to the cold equator. It is a period of maximum atmospheric vitality, where the world is at its most active and the thin air is at its most tangible. Winter eventually plunges the gases back into a solid state, causing the air to literally collapse as frost onto the dark, shadowed ground. As temperatures drop toward the absolute limit, the nitrogen molecules lose their kinetic energy and can no longer remain in a gaseous state, falling out of the sky in a silent, invisible rain of crystals. This atmospheric collapse is so complete that the surface pressure can drop to nearly zero on the winter side of the moon. This dramatic cycle of birth and death for the atmosphere ensures that the sky is a transient, ever-changing part of the moon's identity. The air is not a permanent fixture but a seasonal guest, appearing and disappearing in response to the slow turning of the cosmic clock. It is a final, poetic reminder of the moon's fragility, where even the breath of the world is subject to the unforgiving, icy grip of the deep Neptunian winter. The creeping transition from the deep Neptunian winter is governed by the relentless, slow-motion turning of a cosmic clock that operates on a scale of decades. This geometric progression is dictated by an extreme orbital tilt, a misalignment so severe that it forces the moon to lean precariously as it navigates the dark. Such a sharp angle relative to the path around the sun ensures that the distribution of light is never equitable, instead favouring one hemisphere for nearly a lifetime. It is a planetary orientation that defies the more balanced cycles of the inner worlds, creating an environment where the very concept of a season is redefined. Because the tilt is so pronounced, the sun does not merely rise and set in a daily rhythm, but rather climbs and descends in a spiral that takes 40 years to complete. This tilt is the primary architect of the moon's climate, a fundamental bias in the way the sphere receives its meagre share of solar radiation. Looking at the celestial geometry from afar, one would see a world that appears to be rolling on its side, presenting its poles to the sun in an alternating slow-motion display. This posture is a permanent legacy of the moon's ancient chaotic capture, a mechanical scar that continues to dictate its life today. It ensures that the world is always a place of two extremes, one basking in a long dim day and the other hiding in a cold, eternal shadow. Deep within this frozen regime, time stretches out until a single season encompasses the entirety of a human middle age. Each summer or winter lasts for more than 40 Earth years, a period during which one pole is bathed in continuous, unrelenting sunlight, while the other is abandoned to a deep, unbroken night. This sluggish transition means that any change in the landscape occurs with the agonizing patience of a shifting glacier, far beyond the pace of biological life. The inhabitants of such a world, if they existed, would count their years not by the rotation of the moon, but by the slow migration of the stars across a permanent twilight. A child born at the start of the winter would be a mature adult before ever seeing the sun rise above the horizon for the first time. It is a staggering stretch of time that allows the cold to sink into the very core of the planet, freezing the shadows into the bedrock. This temporal scale defines the slow-motion tragedy and beauty of the moon's existence, where every moment is expanded into an epoch. The long night is not a brief interval of rest, but a multi-decadal reign of absolute zero that transforms the chemistry of the surface. Meanwhile, the long day is a persistent, low-energy glare that slowly, methodically works to undo the work of the previous winter's frost. We are currently witnessing a rare and prolonged southern summer, a temporal window where the faint warmth of the sun is concentrated on the massive polar ice cap. For decades, the southern hemisphere has been tilted toward the solar glint, allowing the meagre energy to slowly seep into the layers of frozen nitrogen. This gradual infusion of heat is currently the primary engine of change on the moon's surface, awakening the dormant chemical systems of the south. Surprisingly, the universe has timed our arrival to coincide with this period of maximum activity, allowing us to see a world that is actively thawing after 40 years of darkness. The sunlight, though weak, is enough to trigger the sublimation of the nitrogen frosts, creating a global shift in the distribution of the moon's mass. This current summer is the reason for the active geysers and the thickening atmosphere we have previously explored. It is a season of slow-motion awakening, where the pinkish plains of the south are at their most brilliant and their most volatile. The creeping edge of the sunlight moves across the continent with the speed of a dying ember, yet its impact is profound and planetary in scale. This era of light represents the high point of the moon's modern history, a brief century of activity before the inevitable return of the cold. As your body continues to rest in complete stillness, consider the silent, invisible migration of the moon's very skin. The slow warming of the southern pole triggers a grand planetary-scale movement, where vast nitrogen glaciers begin to flow away from the heat and toward the colder, shadowed equator. This is not a liquid flow, but a solid state creeping, as the slightly warmed ice becomes plastic enough to move under the pressure of its own weight. These glaciers are composed of the same nitrogen that makes up the air, now acting as a heavy geological force that reshapes the terrain as it moves. They slide across the hardened water ice bedrock with the patience of mountain ranges, filling in the deep valleys of the cantaloupe terrain and smoothing over the tectonic faults. It is a slow, methodical redistribution of matter that seeks the cold of the shadows, fleeing the relentless glare of the 40-year summer. Notice the heavy, grounded feeling in your own limbs, much like the billions of tons of nitrogen ice pressing down on the moon's rigid foundations. This migration is a silent, global reshuffling of the world's resources, driven by a thermal gradient that is barely detectable to human senses. It ensures that the moon is never in a state of static equilibrium, but is always in a state of slow motion, frozen flux. Frost literally travels across the globe during these long shifts, creating transient ice sheets that advance and retreat over the course of decades. This migration is a slow-motion transformation of the terrain, where entire geographical provinces are buried under new layers of nitrogen snow, or revealed as the previous sheet sublimates away. The landscape is never truly fixed, existing instead as a temporary arrangement of volatile crystals that are forever in transit. If we were to look closer at the edges of these ice sheets, we would see a world that is constantly being repainted by the movement of the air and the ice. The frost does not merely sit on the ground, it participates in a global game of leapfrog, moving from the sunny areas to the shadowed ones one molecule at a time. This creates a surface that is fundamentally alive with motion, even if that motion is too slow for the eye to perceive. These transient sheets are the primary reason for the moon's unblemished youth, as they act like a massive global eraser that wipes away the scars of the past. By the time a season has ended, the landscape has been entirely reconfigured, with new ridges of frost and new plains of nitrogen snow. It is a world that is perpetually under construction, built and unbuilt by the shifting winds of the century-long summer. This massive shifting of weight, as billions of tons of nitrogen move from the poles to the equator and back again, may even subtly alter the moon's own rotation. The redistribution of surface and atmospheric mass changes the satellite's moment of inertia, creating microscopic fluctuations in the way it wobbles through the void. It is a stunning example of how a thin, freezing climate can physically influence the mechanical behavior of a massive planetary body. The physics of the moon's spin are inextricably linked to the weather, with every falling snowflake and every sublimating glacier acting as a tiny weight on a cosmic scale. As the nitrogen gathers at one pole, the moon's centre of gravity shifts minutely, forcing the entire sphere to adjust its posture in the gravitational grip of Neptune. It is a rhythmic, almost imperceptible pulse in the moon's orientation, a physical response to the slow-motion migration of its own air. Such a delicate interaction highlights the profound interconnectedness of all the systems on this distant world. The orbit dictates the seasons drive the frost, and the frost in turn influences the very rotation of the sphere. It is a closed loop of celestial mechanics and thermodynamics, a self-regulating machine that has been ticking away in the dark for billions of years. If we were to look closer at the mosaic of the surface, we would find that the moon's survival depends on the intricate balance of albedo variations. Some regions, stained by dark volcanic dust and organic tholins, absorb the precious solar heat and warm significantly, creating localized points of thermal energy. Meanwhile, the pristine white nitrogen plains reflect almost all the energy back into space, maintaining a temperature that is dangerously close to absolute zero. This variation creates a thermal patchwork where localized hot spots drive the thin winds and the migration of the frosts, ensuring that the surface is a playground of competing temperatures. The dark streaks are not just visual anomalies, they are the engines of the local climate, accelerating the sublimation of the ice beneath them. Notice the calm, steady weight of your body, mirroring the solid, reflective planes that refuse to be moved by the faint touch of the sun. This struggle between the light and the dark is the fundamental conflict of the Triton landscape. The reflective white snows represent the moon's desire to remain frozen and still, while the dark organic stains represent the push toward change and activity. It is a visual representation of the moon's internal and external energies fighting for control over the fate of the surface. During the long, agonizing winter on the opposite side of the globe, the dark pole becomes a cosmic trap that gathers fresh, pristine layers of blindingly white nitrogen snow. As the atmosphere collapses in the absolute cold of the 40-year night, the gas turns directly into a solid, coating the northern hemisphere in a new, unblemished skin. This accumulation creates a massive reservoir of volatile material, waiting in a state of suspended animation for the eventual return of the light. This winter reservoir is the bank from which the moon draws its future atmosphere, a stored energy that will be released when the seasons finally turn. For 40 years, this side of the moon is a vault of frozen gas, a quiet and desolate testament to the power of the Neptunian shadow. It is the necessary counterpoint to the activity of the south, a place of profound rest and accumulation in the heart of the void. Surprisingly, even at the absolute height of the southern summer, the zenith of warmth is still a terrifying hundreds of degrees below zero. The term summer is a purely relative concept here, describing a state that would instantly turn any terrestrial substance into a brittle, frozen statue. It is a season of light without heat, a brilliant but sterile illumination that provides the energy for chemical change without ever approaching the threshold of a thaw. The warmth is just enough to agitate a nitrogen molecule into a gas, but it is nowhere near enough to melt a single crystal of water ice into a liquid. To a human observer, the height of the summer would feel indistinguishable from the depths of the winter, a distinction between two different levels of lethal, soul-crushing cold. The moon's activity is a miracle of efficiency, where the tiniest increment of energy is leveraged into a global volcanic eruption. This persistent cold is the defining characteristic of the moon's identity, a boundary that it never truly crosses. The summer is merely a slight softening of the ultimate freeze, a brief moment where the world is allowed to breathe before it is forced to hold its breath again. It is a reminder that in the outer solar system, life and activity are defined not by heat, but by the clever use of the cold. The slow, rhythmic turning of these seasons ultimately dictates the pulse of the entire atmospheric cycle, governing everything from the height of the geysers to the density of the haze. As the sun creeps across the sky over the decades, it pulls the thin nitrogen breath along with it, forcing the world to inhale and exhale in a cadence that transcends human time. This grand, seasonal waltz is the ultimate master of the moon's destiny, a slow-motion heartbeat that defines the life of a world on the edge of the deep. Feel your own breath slowing to match this ancient planetary rhythm, recognizing that you are witnessing a process that began long before the first humans looked at the stars. The seasons are the conductors of the moon's symphony, orchestrating the migration of the frost, the eruption of the plumes, and the collapse of the sky. It is a cycle that ensures the moon remains a dynamic, changing world, even as it drifts through the most stagnant reaches of space. This atmospheric rhythm is the final proof of the moon's integration into the wider solar system, a world that is perfectly tuned to the light of a star billions of miles away. It stands as a magnificent, freezing clock, marking the passage of the eons with the movement of a single ice crystal. As the southern summer continues its slow crawl toward the equator, the moon prepares for its next transformation, a cycle that will continue as long as the blue giant remains in the sky. As long as the blue giant remains a fixture in the sky, its gravity pulls on the world's secret heart, where a massive subsurface ocean of liquid water is strongly suspected to exist. Far beneath the shimmering nitrogen frosts and the pinkish plains of the exterior, this hidden reservoir represents a profound break from the absolute desolation of the outer solar system. It is a world within a world, a dark cathedral of brine that has never known the touch of a single solar photon. Scientists have deduced its presence through the careful observation of the moon's strange shifting orbit and the heat it must inevitably generate. This ocean is not merely a collection of small pockets, but a global interconnected sea that wraps around the entire interior of the satellite. It exists in a state of perpetual heavy silence, a liquid abyss that serves as the ultimate counterweight to the crystalline stillness of the freezing crust. The realization that such a liquid environment could thrive billions of miles from the sun fundamentally shifts our perspective on what constitutes a living world. It suggests that the surface of a planet is merely a mask, hiding a far more complex and active interior that operates on its own unique thermal budget. This deep-seated sea remains the primary goal for future explorers, a tantalizing liquid frontier waiting at the very edge of the cosmic dark. Surprisingly, the universe provides a sophisticated chemical solution to prevent this subterranean sea from becoming a solid, unmoving block of ice in the deep cold. Ammonia mixed into the brine in significant quantities acts as a powerful cosmic antifreeze that lowers the freezing point of the water far below its usual threshold. This chemical presence allows the ocean to remain in a fluid, swirling state, even as the surrounding temperatures plummet toward the floor of the universe. This ammonia-rich mixture creates a viscous, heavy liquid that is uniquely adapted to the high-pressure environment found beneath miles of solid bedrock. It is a toxic yet vital concoction, serving as the essential lubricant that allows the moon's internal layers to slide and shift against one another. Without this specific chemical additive, the internal energy of the moon would likely have been insufficient to keep the abyss from freezing solid eons ago. As the water churns in the dark, the ammonia also acts as a conductor for complex chemical interactions that could never occur in pure frozen water. It transforms the ocean into a reactive, dynamic laboratory, where the fundamental rules of solvency are rewritten by the presence of nitrogen-based compounds. This exotic chemistry is the hallmark of the deep, a hidden signature of a world that has mastered the art of staying liquid in a frozen void. This structure of internal warmth is maintained by the relentless, invisible grinding of the moon's own backward journey through the heavens. The constant tidal friction generated by the retrograde orbit acts as a perpetual furnace, kneading the moon's interior like dough and releasing immense quantities of thermal energy into the abyss. Every time the moon makes its quick 6-day trip around the gas giant, the gravity of the blue planet pulls and stretches its secret sea. This gravitational kneading is far more powerful than anything experienced by native moons, as the contrary motion amplifies the physical stresses exerted on the interior. The resulting heat is a direct conversion of orbital energy into thermal vitality, a process that has kept the ocean warm for billions of years. It is a beautiful mechanical irony that the very orbit that seals the moon's long-term doom also provides the life-sustaining warmth for its hidden deep. The energy produced by this friction is trapped beneath the thick crust, creating a pressurized environment where the water is forced to remain in a liquid state. It is a closed system of thermodynamic survival, powered by the orbital dance that defines the moon's unique place in the solar system. This tidal engine is the primary heartbeat of the world, a rhythmic source of heat that never falters in the dark. Deep within the rocky heart of the sphere, a second, more ancient source of heat continues to radiate outward through the lightless layers. Radioactive decay from heavy elements like uranium and thorium, trapped during the moon's primordial formation, provides a steady, reliable pulse of energy that supplements the friction of the tides. This slow-motion nuclear furnace ensures that the temperature at the base of the ocean remains high enough to prevent total solidification. As these radioactive atoms break down over billions of years, they release a constant stream of heat that works its way through the dense silicate core toward the water above. This internal radiator provides a stable thermal floor for the ocean, ensuring that even if the orbital friction were to fluctuate, the deep-seated warmth would persist. It is a legacy of the moon's birth as a dwarf planet, a stored energy from the dawn of the solar system that has never been fully extinguished. The combination of this core heat and the tidal friction creates a multi-layered thermal engine that supports the liquid abyss from both above and below. This dual heating system is what allows such a massive volume of water to exist so far from any external source of warmth. It turns the moon into a self-heating vessel, a thermodynamic miracle floating in the absolute zero of the Neptunian system. Notice the rhythmic thrum of your own resting heart, echoing the muffled subterranean pulse of a world that is constantly being stretched and squeezed. If we were to look closer at the crust, we would see it physically flexing as it orbits its planetary master, a mechanical distortion that generates heat through sheer, grinding friction. This internal movement is the source of the hidden abyss's vitality, a constant motion that prevents the moon from settling into the silence of a dead rock. As the crust bends, it generates a low-frequency vibration that travels through the ice and into the liquid sea, a soundless thrum that defines the sensory experience of the deep. This flexing is not a subtle event but a massive structural warping that would be palpable to anyone standing on the frozen surface. It is the physical manifestation of gravity being converted into motion, a relentless exercise that keeps the world's internal temperature high enough to sustain a liquid state. This mechanical kneading also helps to circulate the water within the ocean, preventing the sea from becoming stagnant or stratified over time. It keeps the minerals and chemicals in a state of constant motion, ensuring that the entire abyss is a well-mixed and dynamic environment. The flexing crust is the ultimate conductor of the moon's internal symphony, a structural response to a gravitational pull that never lets go. If we were to look closer at the potential for life in the outer dark, the presence of this liquid environment makes the distant moon a fascinating candidate for prebiotic chemistry. Within this lightless sea, the fundamental ingredients of carbon and nitrogen meet the solvency of liquid water, creating a primeval soup tucked away from the harsh radiation of space. It represents a potential sanctuary where the building blocks of something greater could be assembling in the absolute stillness of the deep. The stability of the ocean, protected from the volatile changes of the surface by miles of ice, provides a long-term environment for chemical evolution to unfold. While the surface is a place of 40-year seasons and atmospheric collapse, the deep remains a constant, temperate haven of liquid brine. This longevity is essential for the slow assembly of complex molecules, offering a window of billions of years for the chemistry of life to experiment. Because the ocean is in direct contact with both a rocky core and a protective ice shell, it possesses all the necessary gradients of energy and material required for biological potential. It is a world of chemical opportunity, hidden within a frozen shell that acts as the ultimate shield against the hostile vacuum of space. The hidden abyss is thus not just a geological feature, but a biological frontier waiting at the very edge of our understanding. This cosmic structure facilitates a dark, churning laboratory where dissolved minerals and organic compounds from the core are constantly circulating through the pitch-black ocean. Hydrothermal activity at the seafloor may be pumping nutrients into the brine, creating a chemical gradient that fuels a restless, invisible metabolism. It is a world of chemical mixing, where the history of the moon's rocky heart is written in the salt and silt of the subterranean waves. As the water interacts with the heated rock of the core, it dissolves minerals that would otherwise remain locked in stone, enriching the sea with a complex variety of elements. These minerals are then carried upward by thermal plumes, distributing the core's chemical bounty throughout the entire liquid volume of the moon. This circulation ensures that the ocean is a nutrient-rich environment, far more complex than a simple pool of melted ice. The interface between the stone and the water is a place of intense chemical energy, where the heat of the interior meets the solvent power of the deep. It is here that the moon's most complex reactions likely take place, driven by the steady flow of heat and the abundance of raw materials. This subterranean mixing is the primary driver of the moon's internal evolution, a process that remains completely invisible to the telescopes of Earth. Beneath a frozen ceiling extending tens of kilometers deep, the ocean is trapped in a permanent high-pressure vault of solid water-ice bedrock. This massive barrier separates the liquid interior from the thin nitrogen air above, acting as a colossal insulating blanket that preserves the precious internal warmth. To reach this hidden abyss, one would have to descend through a crystalline fortress of ice that has remained undisturbed for millions of years. The pressure at the base of this ice layer is immense, compacting the frozen water into exotic phases that are far denser than the ice we find in our own polar caps. This rigid sealing is what allows the ocean to maintain its high temperature, preventing the internal heat from escaping into the freezing void of space. It is a structural necessity for the ocean's existence, a solid roof that defines the upper limits of the subterranean world. This depth also protects the ocean from the violent changes occurring on the surface, such as the massive geyser eruptions and the migration of the nitrogen glaciers. While the surface is a place of constant renewal and erosion, the deep remains a static and protected environment, locked away behind a wall of impenetrable ice. The tens of kilometers of frozen bedrock serve as the ultimate defense for the liquid heart of the moon. The surface fractures and fault lines that cross-cut the cantaloupe terrain provide compelling, visible evidence of the crust shifting over a fluid mantle. These scars are the outward expressions of the ocean's influence, showing where the rigid ice has buckled and snapped over the movement of the liquid below. They are the telltale signs of a world that is decoupled from its core, sliding atop a hidden sea that refuses to be ignored. As the tides pull on the moon, the ocean shifts and pushes against the underside of the ice, creating stresses that eventually telegraph to the surface. This tectonic activity is what created the complex ridges and valleys that define the moon's geography, acting as a geological mirror of the hidden abyss. Without the liquid mantle below, the surface would be a dead, unmoving landscape of ancient craters, rather than the dynamic terrain we see today. Following these fracture lines reveals the true, restless nature of a world that is constantly being manipulated by its own internal sea. They are the maps of the deep, providing scientists with the clues necessary to calculate the thickness and density of the ocean far below. Each crack in the melon skin is a testament to the power of the water that flows in the dark, a visible link between the surface and the abyss. This hidden abyss represents a volume of water so staggering that it likely harbours more liquid than nearly all the inner planets combined. It is a watery giant hidden within an icy shell, a secret reservoir that dwarfs the oceans of Earth in its sheer, dark scale. The realization that such a wealth of liquid exists at the very edge of the solar system completely transforms our understanding of where the ingredients for life can truly be found. While Mars is a desert and Venus is a furnace, this distant moon is a world defined by the abundance of its liquid resources. It reminds us that the outer solar system is not a barren wasteland of ice, but a region dominated by hidden water worlds that operate far beyond the reach of the sun. The sheer volume of the abyss is a measure of the moon's internal vitality, a vast liquid empire that has persisted for billions of years. Standing on the frozen nitrogen plains, it is nearly impossible to conceive of the staggering depth and volume of the water resting beneath your feet. This ocean is the moon's greatest secret, a hidden monument to the power of gravity and the persistence of liquid water in the most unlikely of places. It is the final synthesis of the moon's internal character, a world of deep, dark and endless water floating in a sea of blue. Floating in that endless sea of blue, it is easy to forget that this moon was once a sovereign traveller of the deep cosmic wild, governed by its own momentum rather than the dictates of a gas giant. Long before it was bound to the gravity of Neptune, this icy sphere likely existed as an independent dwarf planet, charting its own solitary and magnificent course through the Kuiper Belt. In those ancient days it roamed the lightless frozen frontiers of our solar system, a sibling to legendary worlds like Pluto and Eris, existing in a realm where the sun is but a brilliant pinprick. This era of independence defined its fundamental character, establishing a rocky core and massive reservoirs of water, far beyond the reach of the larger inner planets. It was a master of its own destiny, a pristine world shaped by the slow, methodical accumulation of primordial ices and silicate dust in the quiet dark. For billions of years, it moved through the sparse debris of the solar system's outer rim, a silent witness to the early evolution of our celestial neighbourhood. This wandering heritage remains etched into its very composition, a nomadic legacy that was eventually interrupted by a catastrophic gravitational encounter. Deep within the frozen wastes of the outer dark, the universe rarely leaves such massive wanderers to travel in complete, absolute solitude, and compelling evidence suggests this moon was once part of a rhythmic binary pair. It likely drifted through the cosmic wild in a stable, gravitational embrace with a companion of similar size and ancient stature. Together, they danced through the void, their mutual attraction providing a steady, reliable anchor as they navigated the sparse and lonely debris of the Kuiper Belt. This partnership would have been a beautiful slow-motion waltz of two frozen worlds sharing a common centre of mass while they travelled billions of miles away from the warmth of the inner sun. Such systems are incredibly common in the cold reaches of the outer solar system, where the lack of disruptive planetary gravity allows delicate orbital relationships to persist for eons. This shared journey shaped the earliest history of the moon, providing a social context to its wandering and preparing it for the encounter that would eventually tear its world apart. The two worlds were bound by an invisible tether, a duo of ice and rock moving as one through the velvet blackness of the interstellar frontier. This structure of peaceful binary coexistence was shattered the moment the pair wandered too close to the massive, inescapable gravitational shadow of the great blue planet. As they approached the outskirts of Neptune's domain, the overwhelming tidal forces of the gas giant began to claw at their delicate and ancient partnership. The planet's gravity acted as a massive invisible wedge, exerting a differential pull that grew exponentially stronger with every passing terrifying mile. Suddenly, the internal bond that had held the two worlds together for billions of years was no longer enough to resist the immense external pressure. A violent, silent jolt rippled through the binary system as the pair was forcibly and catastrophically uncoupled, their shared path replaced by a chaotic scramble for celestial survival. In a single, transformative moment, the intimate dance of the Kuiper Belt was traded for the cold, crushing reality of planetary capture. This was the point of no return, where the gravity of a giant reached out into the dark to claim a new subject, regardless of the bonds it had to break to do so. The sheer violence of this separation sent shockwaves through the moon's very foundations, marking the end of its life as a sovereign wanderer. If we were to look closer at the complex physics of this cosmic heist, the outcome for the two uncoupled companions could not have been more dramatically different. While the gas giant's gravity pulled one world into a permanent and backward trap, it acted as a colossal high-speed slingshot for the other, flinging it out into the interstellar deep. This lost companion was ejected from the solar system entirely, becoming a rogue planet condemned to wander the lightless empty gaps between the stars for the rest of time. Meanwhile, the moon we know today was decelerated just enough by the encounter to be ensnared by the planet's powerful and permanent embrace. It found itself trapped in a strange retrograde orbit it never intended to join, moving against the grain of the entire planetary system. It was a brutal trade of one tragedy for another, as a shared life was lost in exchange for a permanent frozen residence at the edge of the blue giant's domain. Notice the steady, grounded sensation of your own body as you contemplate this massive, forced relocation across the silent void of space. The moon's entire destiny was rewritten in a single gravitational event, transforming a free-roaming traveller into a captured lonely prize. This chaotic capture event did not occur in an empty vacuum, but rather acted as a massive, unstoppable wrecking ball that completely devastated the original moon system of Neptune. Before the intruder arrived, the blue planet likely hosted a family of native, well-behaved satellites that orbited in peaceful prograde harmony with the planet's own rotation. The sudden arrival of a massive retrograde body moving with immense momentum in the opposite direction triggered a wave of gravitational instability that ripped through the neighbourhood. These native moons found their stable paths warped and their orbital velocities fatally altered as the newcomer's immense mass asserted its dominance. It was an ecological collapse on a planetary scale, where the established order of the entire system was systematically dismantled by the presence of a foreign giant. The resulting chaos lasted for centuries, as the intruder's gravity cleared the way for its own permanent residence, leaving the original satellites to face a violent end. The blue planet's family was effectively wiped out, replaced by a single massive immigrant that had destroyed everything in its path to claim its throne. Gravitational shockwaves from the new massive intruder radiated outward with lethal precision, leading to a series of direct collisions that shattered the native moons into countless fragments. As the captured world ploughed through the existing orbital planes, it acted like an apex predator in a crowded sea, its heavy wake destabilizing anything that crossed its trajectory. Some of the original satellites were pulled into the intruder's own gravitational well, while others were flung inward toward the planet or outward into the lightless abyss. The collisions were frequent, loud in their physical impact though silent in the vacuum, turning the once ordered system into a chaotic battlefield of pulverized ice and stone. This era of destruction was a necessary part of the Moon's integration, a violent clearing of the local orbital landscape to accommodate its unique, backward journey. The long-standing silence of the outer system was replaced by the grinding and shattering of entire worlds, a process that left the Neptunian neighbourhood fundamentally altered. Surprisingly, the very process that destroyed the old moons provided the raw materials for the features we admire today, proving that even cosmic violence can be a creative force. Beyond the initial destruction, the universe found a way to recycle the wreckage of these shattered worlds, as the debris eventually coalesced to form the smaller rings and moonlets we see today. The pulverized remains of the original Neptunian satellites did not simply disappear, but were ground down by constant impacts and tidal forces into a fine, dark and silicate-rich dust. This material eventually settled into the equatorial plane of the gas giant, creating the thin, elegant and nearly invisible rings that now frame the blue planet's silhouette. The larger fragments that escaped total destruction clumped together over millions of years to form a new generation of small inner moonlets, survivors built from the literal bones of their predecessors. These tiny, irregular bodies now act as silent witnesses to the great cataclysm, forever orbiting in the long shadow of the giant that destroyed their ancestors. They are the fragmented memories of a lost era, orbiting in the wake of the moon that replaced them. Notice the calm, rhythmic pulsing of your breath as you realize that the beauty of the rings is born directly from the most violent era in the system's history. It is a transformation of total chaos into delicate symmetry, a lasting monument to the destructive and creative arrival of the kidnapped wanderer. For millions of years following the initial capture, the moon's orbit was a wild, highly eccentric and sweeping oval that took it far into the freezing deep before dragging it back. This was a period of extreme instability, where the physical distance between the two bodies fluctuated wildly over the course of every single 6-day journey. Each close pass subjected the moon to a terrifying and visceral surge of gravitational pressure, while the far reaches of the orbit offered only a brief respite in the absolute dark. The path was a jagged, unpredictable scar across the heavens, a far cry from the perfect and serene circle we observe in the modern era. This era of eccentricity was the forge in which the moon's modern geology was hammered out, as the constant changes in distance prevented it from ever reaching a state of stability. It was a world caught in a state of permanent transition, still struggling to reconcile its Kuiper Belt origins with its new planetary constraints. The planet's pull was a leash that constantly jerked the moon back from the edge of the void, a rhythmic violence that defined its early years as a satellite. Beneath the shivering heart of the moon, tidal forces furiously stretched and squeezed the interior, generating enough internal heat to melt the core and erase the original surface. As the world moved along its wild, elliptical path, the constant warping of its frozen frame acted like a massive celestial furnace that burned from within. This intense, internal friction eventually turned the bedrock into a flowing, viscous fluid, triggering a global repaving event that wiped out billions of years of history. The craters and mountain ranges the moon had gathered during its time as a free wanderer were swallowed by massive floods of warm, slushy ice rising from the depths. It was a total planetary reset of the clock, a baptism of fire and gravity that transformed a scarred Kuiper Belt object into the smooth, young world we see today. This era of melting is the primary reason the moon looks so fresh and unblemished, as its original ancient identity was literally boiled away by the heat of its own capture. If we were to look closer, we would see that the very face of the moon is a scar, a healed surface that masks the violence of its rebirth. Eventually, this immense and continuous energy dissipation forced the orbit to bleed away its wild eccentricity and settle into the neat, tight circle it maintains today. Every ounce of heat generated within the moon's core during those millions of years was energy taken directly from its orbital motion, a heavy tax paid in exchange for long-term stability. As the eons passed, the swinging oval path gradually and gracefully rounded out, the Moon's velocity finding a perfect permanent balance with the gas giant's pull. This process of orbital circularization brought an end to the most violent and transformative phase of the Moon's history, establishing the steady waltz that has lasted for billions of years. The world transitioned from a chaotic and destructive intruder into a permanent synchronized resident, its backward path finally finding a state of graceful circular stasis. It no longer fought the gravity that held it, but instead yielded to the inevitable pull of its new home. This final settlement is the reason for the Moon's unique retrograde tranquility, a peaceful ending to a journey that began with the violent tearing of a binary heart. Now it moves with a calm and measured pace, a world that has finally found its place in a system it once sought to destroy. While the Moon currently moves with a calm and measured pace, this quiet tranquility is a deceptive mask for a relentless and invisible physical conflict that has defined its existence since the moment of its capture. Because the satellite orbits in a retrograde direction, moving directly against the primary rotational current of its host planet, it experiences a constant and subtle gravitational friction that saps its kinetic energy. This invisible drag acts as a cosmic brake, systematically robbing the world of its forward momentum with every passing moment in the deep dark. Deep within the invisible tides of the Neptunian system, the energy of the Moon's motion is being slowly and methodically converted into internal heat, a process that ensures the satellite cannot maintain its current distance forever. This drainage of orbital vitality means the Moon is trapped in a closed thermodynamic system, where its own movement powers the warmth of its hidden oceans. It is a slow-motion robbery on a planetary scale, a silent theft that dictates the eventual end of the Moon's long and wandering journey through the outer solar system. This structural drain is a fundamental consequence of the Moon's unique and rebellious path through the cold and silent reaches of the outer planetary domain. Unlike native satellites that travel in easy harmony with their planet's spin, this captured intruder must constantly fight the gravitational grain of the entire system. The result is a slow and inevitable deceleration, a lingering loss of speed that ensures the world is forever losing its billion-year battle against the pull of the blue giant. This continuous drainage of energy results in a slow and inescapable orbital decay, a process where the Moon is gradually and relentlessly drawn inward toward its planetary master. Every single day, the physical distance between the frozen world and the azure clouds of Neptune shrinks by a microscopic but mathematically certain amount. It is a creeping descent that follows a rigid and immutable trajectory, a one-way path that leaves no room for celestial escape or reversal in the coming ages. Surprisingly, the universe allows this process to unfold over such an immense period that it remains completely undetectable to any casual observer from the inner solar system. The satellite is effectively spiraling toward its ultimate doom with the patience of a world that measures time in eons rather than human centuries. This inward crawl is the primary driver of the Moon's long-term history, a quiet and persistent movement that defines the final act of its complex planetary biography. The descent is as steady as the pulse of a distant star, a rhythmic and unyielding migration from the relative safety of the outer reaches toward the dangerous heart of the system. Each revolution brings the Moon a few centimeters closer to the crushing weight of the gas giant, tightening the gravitational leash that has held it since its ancient capture. It is a journey of quiet and profound inevitability, a slow motion falling through the void that will eventually reach its dramatic and beautiful conclusion. In the staggering and nearly incomprehensible vastness of the distant future, approximately 3.5 billion years from now, this descent will finally reach its terminal threshold. Notice the deep and rhythmic stillness in your own chest as you contemplate the immense stretches of time that must pass before the final curtains are drawn on this world. This countdown is far longer than the existence of entire mountain ranges on Earth, yet it remains a finite and decided period in the life of the Neptunian system. The Moon will eventually reach a proximity that is physically and structurally incompatible with its own survival as a unified and solid planetary body. This specific point in space is not a visible wall, but a mathematical limit where the forces of the universe finally demand their due and begin to dismantle the sphere. As the Moon approaches this threshold, the stresses on its frozen crust will intensify, a final warning before the absolute destruction that awaits in the inner depths of the system. The timeline for this event is as fixed as the laws of physics themselves, a clock that has been ticking since the very moment the Moon was first snatched from the wild. It is a long and silent wait, a period of trillions of hours during which the Moon will continue to shimmer with a ghostly blue light. Yet, the end is already written in the geometric perfection of the orbit, a fate that draws closer with every silent and backward lap it takes around its master. This structure of gravitational forces defines a region known as the Roche limit, a boundary where a planet's tidal pull becomes more powerful than a moon's internal gravity. If we were to look closer at the physics of this line, we would see it as the point where the Moon's own weight is no longer enough to hold its ice and rock together. It is a physical breaking point, a boundary in space where the integrity of a world is finally sacrificed to the overwhelming power of the giant it orbits. The planet's gravity pulls on the near side of the Moon with significantly more force than on the far side, creating a stretching effect that eventually becomes lethal to the Moon's structure. At the Roche limit, this differential pull becomes so extreme that it exceeds the chemical and gravitational bonds that maintain the satellite's spherical shape. The world is effectively stretched until it can no longer resist, a moment of structural failure that signals the transition from a solid moon to a dispersed ring. This invisible barrier is a fundamental feature of every planetary system, a zone where large satellites are simply forbidden to exist in a solid and coherent state. Crossing this line is the ultimate transformation, a process where the planet's authority over the surrounding space becomes absolute and destructive. It is the final and most powerful manifestation of the blue giant's reach, a force that dismantles worlds with a quiet and effortless precision. Once the line is crossed and the Moon enters this forbidden zone, Neptune's immense and unforgiving gravity will physically begin to tear the giant sphere apart. The process is not a sudden explosion, but a systematic and silent shredding of the frozen crust and the rocky core beneath the ice. It is a spectacular and terrifying display of tidal force, where a world of billions of tons of matter is pulled into pieces as if it were made of nothing more than loose sand. The crust will fracture and buckle in a way that makes the ancient tectonic faults of the past seem like microscopic and insignificant cracks in the ice. Huge sections of the Cantaloupe terrain and the southern ice cap will be ripped away from the bedrock, floating off into the void as independent shards of rubble. The Moon will lose its roundness, becoming an elongated and distorted mass of debris as it is dragged further into the planetary depths by the inescapable tide. This act of planetary reclamation is the final and most violent consequence of the Moon's long status as a captured and immigrant body. The planet that once offered a home to the wandering traveller now becomes its executioner, reclaiming the matter it once held in a stable and circular orbit. It is a final, crushing embrace that turns a majestic satellite into a stream of fragments, a process that will eventually fill the inner system with the wreckage of a lost world. Massive chunks of ancient water ice bedrock and shimmering plates of frozen nitrogen will shatter into countless and jagged fragments during the final collapse of the world. Allow your muscles to release any final and lingering tension, settling into the quiet weight of your own existence as you imagine the Moon dissolving into 1 trillion pieces of sparkling dust. These remnants of the lunar surface will be pulverized by the intense tidal grinding, reduced to a glittering cloud of frost and silicate dust that marks the end of the world. The liquid water of the hidden deep, once shielded by miles of solid ice, will be released into the vacuum, instantly turning into a fine and shimmering spray of crystalline snow. These fragments will spread out along the moon's orbital path, creating a trail of debris that tracks the final journey of the captured wanderer through the dark. The once solid foundations of the moon will be scattered across thousands of miles of empty space, a glittering ruin that catches the faint light of the distant sun. This shattering is the ultimate realization of the moon's transience, a final dispersal of the materials that were once gathered into a unique and complex world. The individual pieces, some the size of mountains and others the size of sand grains, will begin their new lives as the building blocks of a new cosmic structure. The world is gone, but its matter remains, dancing in the light as a trillion tiny echoes of the planet that once was. This catastrophic and beautiful destruction will eventually create a spectacular ring system around the blue giant, a display that may one day rival the legendary glory of Saturn. The shattered remains of the moon will settle into a thin and elegant disk of ice and dust, orbiting exactly where the moon once traced its backward path. It is a transformation of a single and solid pearl into a magnificent crown of frost that will dominate the sky of the Neptunian system for millions of years. These new rings will be far brighter and more substantial than the current, dusty remnants that Neptune presently hosts in its orbital plane. They will shimmer with the high reflectivity of the moon's nitrogen and water ice, creating a brilliant and sapphire-tinted halo around the gas giant. To any distant observer, the planet will appear entirely transformed, adorned with the glittering remains of its largest and most famous captive. This new ring system will serve as a lasting monument to the moon's existence, a beautiful and complex record of the world that was once there. It is a poetic outcome for a captured wanderer, turning its final destruction into a display of cosmic art that will last for eons. The death of the moon becomes the birth of a ring, a transition that highlights the endless cycle of change in the outer solar system. The remaining debris that does not find a stable place in the ring system may eventually spiral inward, raining down into the deep and turbulent atmosphere of the gas giant. These fragments of the lost lunar world will enter the blue clouds at hypersonic speeds, burning up like brilliant meteors in the high-altitude air. It is a final homecoming for the immigrant moon, where its materials are finally integrated into the very body of the planet that captured it so long ago. The nitrogen gas, the water ice, and the organic tholins will all be swallowed by the massive planetary furnace, adding their mass to the shifting storms of the host world. This rain of debris will mark the absolute end of the moon's independent physical identity, as its atoms are scattered throughout the atmosphere of the giant. The once distant pearl will be completely consumed, its secrets lost in the churning and endless depths of the Neptunian winds. Surprisingly, the universe ensures that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed and relocated into a new and different form. The moon's legacy will survive as a chemical enrichment of the planet's clouds, a subtle and lasting change in the composition of the blue giant. It is a quiet and final surrender, the conclusion of a story that began in the distant wild and ended in the heart of a gas giant. The moon moves with a grace that hides its inevitable end, its frozen plains and cryovolcanic plumes presenting a face of timeless and unyielding beauty to the void. It is a world that lives on borrowed time, a celestial traveller that has accepted its fate with a quiet and measured dignity as it circles its master. This doomed waltz is one of the most poignant spectacles in our solar system, a display of life and activity on the very edge of ultimate destruction. We are fortunate to exist in the brief window of time when this world is still solid and whole, a witness to its unique and restless maturity. The moon continues to breathe its nitrogen air and shift its icy glaciers, unaware of the hidden countdown that dictates its future. It is a magnificent and lonely performer in the cosmic dark, dancing a backward dance that will never be repeated by any other large world. Ultimately, the fate of this world stands as a profound and humbling reminder that even the most solid planetary bodies are merely temporary structures in the vastness of time. The mountains of ice, the canyons of the melon skin, and the hidden oceans of the deep are all transient arrangements of matter in a universe of constant change. In the grand and unfolding timeline of the cosmos, even the most massive and ancient moons are but passing shadows that eventually fade into the void. This realization invites a state of deep and tranquil perspective, a recognition of the fleeting and precious nature of all the wonders we observe in the heavens. The stability of the ground beneath our feet is a relative and temporary condition, a brief pause in a much longer story of creation and dispersal. We find a quiet peace in this understanding, accepting the rhythm of a universe that builds and dismantles its worlds with equal and effortless grace. The moon's journey from a free wanderer to a captured ringmaker is a microcosm of the life of the entire solar system. It is a story of capture, transformation, and eventual return to the elements from which it was once formed. Standing on the edge of the blue giant's domain, we see the true nature of the cosmos, a place where everything is in motion, and even the stars themselves are but flickering candles in the eternal night. Triton is a cosmic paradox captured from the wild, an aggressively frozen yet violently active world destined to die by the same gravity that gave it its majestic, restless life. Deep within the grand design of the cosmos, this world stands as the ultimate synthesis of life and destruction, a captive heart that beat with more vigour than the native children of its system. This structure of absolute freeze and volcanic fire found its most vibrant era only after it was stolen from the wild. Triton remains a cosmic paradox captured from the wild, an aggressively frozen yet active sphere destined to die by the same gravity that gave it its majestic, restless life. Now, let the vastness of the outer reaches fade away, replaced by the weight of your own existence in this quiet room. Your journey through the blue twilight is complete, and it is time to return your awareness to the safe, still sanctuary of your bed. Surprisingly, the body knows exactly how to settle, beginning with the tips of your toes. Release any lingering tension in your feet, feeling them grow heavy against the sheets. Let the relaxation climb into your calves, a slow wave of comfort that anchors you to the moment. This quiet room is the only world that matters now, a soft cocoon where the light is dim. Notice how the knees and thighs sink deeper into the mattress with every exhaled breath. The hips follow suit, softening as they surrender to the pull of gravity. If we were to look closer at the rhythm of your resting state, we would see the muscles of the torso releasing their grip. The belly rises and falls with a natural, unforced cadence. Let the shoulders drop away, feeling the weight of the arms as they rest motionless by your side. Every finger softens, the palms opening slightly as they forget the tasks of the day. The hands rest in complete and total stillness, becoming part of the heavy comfort of the blankets. The pillows cradle your head with a gentle, consistent pressure that invites the mind to finally be still. Release the small muscles around the eyes, letting the lids become heavy and undisturbed in the darkness. The jaw relaxes, the tongue rests easy, and the forehead becomes smooth and cool. Ambient air in the room is cool and still, a perfect contrast to the warmth radiating from the center of your chest. Each breath is a slow invitation to sleep. The mattress provides a perfect, unwavering foundation that supports you without conditions. You're sinking into a state of profound and absolute rest, where the thoughts of the day are replaced by the simple sensation of existing. The shadows of the room are soft and protective, wrapping around you like a familiar embrace. Every part of you is now heavy, peaceful, and ready to succumb to the silence. Soft blankets feel pleasant against your chin, providing a tactile reminder of the safety found in this moment. The world outside is far away, hushed and irrelevant to the peace you have cultivated here. Sleep is a gentle and rising wave that is moving to meet you, an inevitable transition into the night, and now 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.